Hello, everybody. It's my privilege to introduce to you, all the way from the south side of Chicago, the man, the myth, the legend, my Theo, your brother, the South Side Unicorn.
And what they're proposing, Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
Hey, it's your boy Ken White, host of the Southside Unicorn Show. And today's show, you are lucky that you're here. I have some of the most esteemed people in the Republican Party, and we're about to have a conversation about something that's very, very important in America. Again, I stress to you this is a conversation, and we're going to touch on the topic of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it will intersect on the idea of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Marxist, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a national treasure. That's going to be the axis of the conversation of this chat. With me today are the following people, and I will begin with Jessica. Jessica, say hi to the audience.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet everyone. Yeah, my name is Jessica Rutan. I'm a state delegate here in the state of California. I'm also running for Central Committee in the Assembly District 59. So if you're out in my district, please vote for me. And you can reach me at jrutan@aubreydog.com.
Outstanding. And without any introduction, many of you already know the face that's to my left, is it? That would be the beautiful Agnes. Agnes, say hi to the audience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am an angel mom, not by choice. I campaigned with President Trump. I'm a former congressional candidate. I'm running for Central Committee, and I'm a Trump supporter 1,000,000 times over. And God bless this country, and let's close these borders down so more people won't die at the hands of illegal aliens.
Outstanding. And the brother below me here, as you can see, I mean, with the big old guns, I mean, I should have introduced you, sir, first. I'm so sorry, sir. Without any further ado, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello, everybody. I'm Stephen Davis. I'm a contributor with Turning Point USA, and I stand for all things truth. And at the end of the day, as the Bible says, the truth will set you free. So that's what I'm all about. You can find me on Instagram at Stephen Davis 1776.
Outstanding. And we got Nick Torres. You have to unmute yourself. Please introduce yourself to the audience, brother.
Yeah, my name is Nick Torres, and just a side note, I might be appearing as Mark A. Torres via my Zoom. I'm using a proxy account to attend this meeting. I'm a former congressional candidate, American nationalist activist, and the best way you could find me is on Instagram at nick.torres40. That's at nick.torres40. And Ken, thank you for hosting this and having me on today.
You're more than welcome. This is a conversation that we have to have. And last but not least, and in the nick of time, Mr. Emery. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good there, Ken, and I'm glad I finally got in. I don't know what was going on here, but my name is Emery McClendon. I'm located in Indiana, and you can best reach me on Facebook at Emery MC.
Outstanding. Okay, so here we go, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get off into this with the basics, which, everybody should know. Some people don't know. So we're just going to gloss over it very quickly here. Allow me to get to my show prep, which is what we should have had laid out. Hey, Steve, do you have like a producer and assistants that help you do your show prep?
Not at all. It's all me, brother.
Oh, man. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I wished I had Jeremy with me right now, because Jeremy used to help me keep all this stuff absolutely, flush. But
right.
It happens. I just got to roll with what I got. Let's do this. And it's your basic Wikipedia introduction to the person we know as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I will hold off on using the term Reverend until this conversation is done. It's going to be two parts. So I'll hold off on using the term reverend until we end this conversation. And you, the audience, will be the judge of whether we reapply that to his name. But right now, we're going to be discussing Martin Luther King Jr., born on January 15th, 1929, and unfortunately, we lost him on April 4th, 1968, to an assassin's bullet. Here in his Wikipedia biography, it is read this way: American Christian minister, activist, and political philosopher who was one of the most prominent leaders in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. A Black church leader and a son of early civil rights activist and minister Martin Luther King Sr. King advanced civil rights for people of color in the United States through the use of nonviolent resistance and nonviolent civil disobedience against Jim Crow laws and other forms of discrimination in the United States. That is how we are given the information on who Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is. We obviously know that all of us are very complex people, very complex creatures, and that is just a veneer. There's more to all of us. There's more to Dr. King. And we're about to delve into that right now. Let me explain to the audience. This chat, the chat about the Dreamer, came about when I looked on my brother's page, because I follow him, Stephen Davis, aka MAGA Hawk. I saw his page, and actually, as he said, he's a contributor to Turning Point USA, and its leader, its president, its captain, Charlie Kirk, actually did an expose, a piece on Dr. King on Martin Luther King's Memorial Day. It was shocking. It was revelations or information that I had not seen and was not prepared to read. But again, if it's factual, if it's data, it is what it is. I could have prepared myself more for this show, ladies and gentlemen, but I didn't want to do that. I want to learn as you learn with me. I will have questions that I imagine my audience would want me to ask of you all. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, where you had the Bud Billiken Parade, the Operation Push parades, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. parades. So I am, I guess, a product of what the media gave us as to who this man is. I believe it would be appropriate to allow Stephen Davis his 5 minutes to explain to us what this was I saw on, I'm sure you can speak for him on this. What was it that I saw on Charlie Kirk's page where he said that Dr. Martin Luther King is overrated pretty much and that he's a Marxist? Do you want to expand at this point? Can you help us with that?
Yes, sir. I mean, I didn't honestly. I didn't even read his post, but I do agree. I mean, in regards to Martin Luther King being a Marxist, 100%, the ideologies that he put forth were Marxist in nature. So that's one of the issues that I have with MLK is with two things in general. One, that he was a Trojan horse, right? He was a Trojan horse, and he ushered in a false gospel, the social gospel, which is often what he spoke about. And he also talked about a grievance, right? A grievance style movement in the civil rights movement. So when I look at both of these things and I see the problems that both arise out of this, when it comes to this grievance style movement, the civil rights movement, and you look at the backers behind the civil rights movement, the Bayard Russins, the Stanley Levinsons, who are themselves Marxists, and the influence, the Marxist influence, the Marxist rhetoric of the redistribution of wealth. I mean, all this type of thing that's not good for America. It's not going to be beneficial, not only for the Black community, but for America at large. When you look at things of this nature, it's really sad to see that a person of this nature would put forth such a message. And you look at it would be one thing if Martin Luther King came right out and said, you know what, I am a Marxist. This is the ideology that I stand with. This is the ideology I'm going to put forth. But he didn't do that. Often, James Cone, the father of liberation theology, he talks about how MLK would, in private, talk about his Marxist beliefs, his communist beliefs, and the redistribution of wealth and the things that he wants to implement. But in public, he would put forth certain messaging that only somewhat alludes to it because he knows that the general public is not really warmed to such a
Warmed
notion.
up to that. Let me interject right here because again, I'm coming into this with no preconceived ideas about the argument, but I do want to touch on that you just spoke on, which is in the Cold War climate of the 1950s and 1960s, the threat of communism galvanized public attention. In 1953, Martin Luther King called communism one of the most important issues of the day. See his paper 6-146.
Mm-hmm.
As King rose to prominence, he frequently had to defend himself against the allegations of communists. Though his views that communists and Christianity are fundamentally incompatible did not change, King's Strength, page 93, read that. Although sympathetic to communism core's concerns with social justice, King complained that its cold atheism wrapped in garments of materialism, communism provides no place for God or Christ. This I'm pulling from his own information in his own bio.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand what you're saying. Now, how do I call you, brother? Am I going to call you Stephen today or am I calling you Maga Hope? What's happening?
You call me Steven, you can call me Maga Hope. Either or is fine with me. I answer to all.
There it is. There it is. I'm going to call you brother first. You know what I mean? Because in my heart, you're my
Yes,
brother.
sir.
But Stephen, what do you say to that? I understand that what you're saying is he cloaked himself in the imagery opposite to his deepest beliefs. But these are his papers that are on file too, that he said, yes, I kind of understand communism, but I believe capitalism is the better way to go. This is a paraphrase of his papers. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, a person can espouse one thing, but he can espouse one thing in public, but in private it's a different story. Also, when you look at him and the things that he espoused, you also have to check the rhetoric. You also have to check what the person has done and what he advocates for, right? He constantly talked about a better distribution of resources or a redistribution of resources, which is in and of itself a Marxist belief, one of the core aspects of Marxist ideology. So,
and thank you for that. I want to say this real quick. You're saying redistribution of wealth, but I'm wondering if the people in Chicago, in New York, Georgia, would that more be aligned with an ask for reparations? Or was he actually talking about the entire system going that way, or that blacks needed some type of reparation? What is this distribution?
Well, it's all about seeking big government for to solve all of your ills, which again is another core aspect of Marxism. You can't bring in Marxism, and you can't bring in communism. You can't bring out socialism without people identifying with the government as the savior of all things. So when you say the redistribution of resources, redistribution of wealth, that has to come from big government. That means big government has to go into the pockets of the American people and say, you know what, this is what we're going to do on behalf of another group of people. The grievance style of Martin Luther King, what he espoused, is also something a communist tactic of the left that is oftentimes presented. Uh, Manning Johnson in a great book called Color Communism and Communism.
Well, right there, I can see you could go on and on. You have a wealth of information. We got a whole show to go. Now, at this moment, with everything you've just said, Stephen, and this is revelations to a lot of us, I'm going to defer to Jessica right now. Jessica, with what you've heard, and this is the axis of this conversation, that Dr. Martin Luther King wasn't exactly who we were taught he was and who he portrayed himself to be to us. What are your thoughts and reactions on what you've just heard?
Actually, I agree with what he's saying. It is certainly, as I went into college and as I started reading for myself and wanting to know more about this man, I think it was a disappointment for me personally because I had such a great thought of this man. And then when I became a teacher and as an educator, and when it came to Martin Luther King and we were going to teach about him and this magnificent man, and we celebrated his birthday. It was hard at times to, how do you justify in my own mind for me that this dichotomy of a man who had his dreams but at the same time, behind the scenes was very much, as far as I was concerned, a socialist, and had Marxist ideas about how and who he felt about this country as a whole.
Well, see, when
His-
I hear that Marxist, socialist, that Martin Luther King was these things, I'm trying to line that up with the times that he was in. The time that he was in, the Democrat Party ruled the day pretty much. The Democrat Party from the 1950s forward, especially after McCarthyism lost its battle with socialism and communism in America, the Democrat Party could easily and more readily be identified with socialist and communist ideas than the Republican Party. The things that Dr. King were advocating for, they actually fly in the face of the very things that we're hearing. I want to go to Emory. Emory, what is your thought about what you're hearing right now?
Okay, Ken, I'm very happy to be here tonight, and I want to say that I've done a lot of research, and I've studied a lot of the stuff about Dr. Martin Luther King. I've heard about the communist quote unquote ties, his Marxism, his views, how he was closely a follower of Gandhi, even Karl Marx and some of the other ones. But a lot of this stuff didn't come out until after his death, and it came out through such groups as the fake Zionists, the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, who we know.
Whoa, I got to stop
not.
you for a minute. I'm listening to you. I do this for the benefit of the audience because that's why I'm here, yours truly, is to help the audience navigate their way through some very complex ideations. We'll talk about that obviously on another show, but I heard you use a term, fake Zionist?
Yeah, there's a lot of literature out there about these groups that call themselves Zionist groups, and they have put out that Martin Luther King. Matter of fact, in some of their literature, it says that we don't call him Martin Luther King, we call him Martin Lucifer King.
Whoa!
I don't know if you've ever heard that or not.
No, not.
And
wow.
And there's lots of literature out that supports that argument. And because of, they say that he had the background with starting off with Gandhi and so forth. I think a lot of what Martin Luther King did during that period of time, he did it out of ignorance, just like most blacks did during that period, and even now in the modern times, falling into the hands of socialism and communism simply because they don't understand what it is and what it was. And I think over time, Martin Luther King began to change his views, and he supported more toward capitalism, but the dirt had begun to
settle. So
him.
let me, on that point, let me interject here, because he wrote a letter to Coretta while he was in college, and this is what he said.
I was going to talk about.
King's first studied communism on his own while a student at Crozier Theological Seminary in 1949. In his 1958 memoir, he reported that although he rejected communism's central tenets, he was sympathetic to Marx's critique of capitalism, finding the gulf between superfluous wealth and abject poverty that existed in the United States was morally wrong. See Stride, page 94. Writing his future wife, Coretta Scott, during the first summer of their relationship, he told her that he was, quote, more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic, and yet I am not so opposed to capitalism that I have failed to see its relative merits, end quote. Papers 6, 123, page 123 through 125. I'm pulling from some of his biography, and that dovetails with what you're saying, Emory. All of you all, thank you so much for your astute inputs, because Emory, you're right. Our people are not politically, boy, I'm going to step in it right here, but I'm going to say it. Our people are not politically literate. And Malcolm X spoke on that as well. And both of you, everyone has already kind of highlighted that right now. So we're going to segue into this. Thank you all for your patience. But I need to tap Agnes for a moment, because Agnes, at this moment, I need you to give the audience the background of who you are and your exposure to socialism, please, before I ask you the question I need to ask.
Well, hi, I was born in Budapest, Hungary, which was a communist country at the time. And my parents escaped after the Soviet Union invaded our country. And in socialism, you have no rights to speak up. You have no rights to protest. You have no rights to do anything, because if you do, you get arrested, and either they execute you or you go to a labor force camp. And that's basically what it was. So I'm listening to what everybody is saying here, and I honestly didn't see any intent of Dr. King to be wanting socialism at all. What I saw that he wanted was desegregation, the rights to vote, and labor rights. He was just standing up for his people. And let's face it, after Lincoln emancipated the slaves, almost 100 years went by and they had no rights, which I don't know too much about the history of this country of Martin Luther King. But I honestly, this past weekend, I saw an awful lot of documentaries about him, and I was very impressed. And also the fact that he always had very peaceful protests, nothing like it is today. What we have today with BLM is a totally different level. That's what I would call, well, we're not even going there, but.
Well, I want to ask you a question right there. You said that this doesn't look like the communism you grew up in. You actually tasted communism firsthand. Am I right?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was very young when my parents escaped, but I grew up hearing not only from my parents, that's all I heard, what communism was and how difficult it was, how everything was controlled for everybody, not just one group of people or another. Everybody. Everybody had a ticket to buy meat, and it didn't matter if you had the money to buy extra meat, you couldn't. So the government controlled everything. There were no free enterprises, free businesses. Okay. Everything was owned by the government.
So what you're saying is what you're hearing right now doesn't necessarily line up with the unadulterated, unvetted communism and socialism that you experienced and grew up in. So that's one thing. But you're also saying that this is not, Dr. King is not Black Lives Matters. His approach was not that. But now when I think about Stephen Davis and Charlie Kirk and the message that's being put out there, which is Dr. Martin Luther King is not who we think he is, part of that new message is he's part of a progenitor. He's like a Trojan horse who actually ushered in the very people that you're saying, Agnes, he doesn't mirror, and has caused this. I don't want to use the word reverse discrimination, because racism and discrimination are nasty and bad no matter which direction they go in. So there's no such thing as reverse discrimination, because you'll in effect be saying doing it to the Black folks is right. No. Hatred, bigotry, racism, all of those things are wrong no matter who it's aimed at. And on that note, I want to bring in my man, Nick Torres. Please introduce yourself again, and let's hear your perspective and take on this topic.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me on tonight, Ken. So I actually agree with Stephen emphatically that MLK is actually a Marxist. And I think MLK, and I disagree with Agnes, even though that she is from Hungary, a country I like very much and spent 2 years in. MLK, I believe, is the progenitor of the Black grievance movements and the Black ethnic lobbies that have kind of fomented a anti-white sentiment in the country, particularly since the George Floyd summer. And I just want to give some quotes too, if you don't mind my saying, on MLK and Marxism. This is from Harry Belafonte's book, My Song, which recounts an anecdote between MLK and Andrew Young. They're discussing the merits of socialism and capitalism. He tells Andrew Young, he being MLK, "You're a capitalist, I'm not." There's also the letter which you cited, dated from July 18th, 1952, which he tells Coretta Scott King, "I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic." If you look at also esteemed civil rights historian David Garrow, who wrote the book Burning the Cross, or Bearing the Cross, it's a very famous account of MLK and his civil rights activism. Garrow writes, "Economically speaking, King, considered himself what he termed a Marxist, largely because he believed with increasing strength that American society needed a radical redistribution of wealth and economic power to achieve even a rough form of social justice." And also, I want to mention this.
I want to stop you right there for just 1 second, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, and we're actually reading some of the same empirical data together, which is great. That shows that we're doing this the right way. We got the proper show prep, the proper research. we are familiar with what we're talking about. But I want to ask a question right there, Nick, because I can understand where you're about to probably go. If you're about to fall off the ledge, I mean, you're about to fall off the ledge. And as Agnes pointed out, between the Emancipation Proclamation and the rise of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there was 100 years of disparity, the antebellum period, all these things. I know that's why I'm prefacing this real quick. If you're about to fall off a ledge and somebody reaches their hand out to save you and you are actually saved, do you really care that they were Marxists? And I say that to say that Dr. Martin Luther King came along in a time in history where he was inserted, or not necessarily thrusted, into the position that he was in. So is he an unwitting, as Emory states, is he an unwitting participant in a larger program than he? Or are you saying he actually knew he was the grandfather, per se, of BLM? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I think actually he was an empty vessel and was basically an empty vessel for the social views and activism of others like Stanley Levison, who wrote his speeches and helped draft the I Have a Dream speech, and Bayard Rustin, who is a communist homosexual and behind the scenes. I think those were some of the people. I think King was very much an empty vessel for those people who were more extreme behind him. But I also wanted to mention, too, kind of what you're saying there. I think King is also responsible for the current DEI administration that so many conservatives complained about throughout schools. And especially if you look later on towards the end of his career with the Poor People's Campaign, he was emphatic in describing the Poor People's Campaign as essentially a uprising of Hispanics, Indians, Negroes, his words, to call for social justice and equity throughout the country. Now, that doesn't really sound like someone who's an American, someone who's not a Marxist. I think that to me sounds like someone who's trying to corral the non-whites of the country, quite frankly, against the larger white population. And I think that's a big issue. And I think with Dr. King, too, we're not going off a ledge. I think it has to be brought up because we have to be so honest about these various figures, whether it's George Washington and Andrew Jackson. We have to insist that they're slaveholders, or Christopher Columbus. We have to, kind of discuss their historical legacies. I think it's important to do the same with King and the fact that he was a well-known associate of communists and kind of.
I hear you, but let me interject right here.
I think that's important to point out.
Nick, let me interject right here. I understand what you're doing and what my brother Stephen is doing, what Jessica is saying. I understand that what you're doing is you're laying bare, you're pulling back the layers of the onion, and you're showing the different layers and connected tissues of Dr. Martin Luther King. But when I hear you use terms like empty vessel, that's hard to my ears. That's hard to my empty vessel.
Yeah, I believe he was an empty vessel because actually, too, if you look at Dr. King, aside from his Marxist accusations, you have to look at the serious accusations of plagiarism. And he said at the end of this tonight, if we should consider calling him Reverend, I think at the end of the tonight, we should even consider calling him Doctor, because there's actually a October 11th, 1991 article that was found in the Associated Press, which was and they cite a Boston University panel, which found that King largely plagiarized large sections of his dissertation. And now that's not from J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. These are from left-wing academics and probably one of the most academic cities in the country, Boston. So I think that's important to point out. So again, being an empty vessel, he used ghostwriters like Stanley Levison. He plagiarized his doctoral thesis. I don't think this is someone, and as someone, me, an aspiring academic, someone who's attending graduate school, I think plagiarism is highly dishonorable.
Well, as we've just learned with Dr. Claudine Gay, yes, plagiarism is a very serious matter, or is it? Because the left-wing departments, she still holds tenure with Harvard University, and her plagiarism is laid bare. So
we're not talking about Claudine Gay. We're talking about Dr. King, and Dr. King was the plagiarist.
No. Stop, Nick.
Well, we're talking about Dr. King.
Nick, we're talking about Dr. King, but you brought up an idea of legalism, that these are the reasons that you would strip him of his doctor's degree. That being true, then it must be done for all, because guess what? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Yeah. So if Dr. Claudine Gay, pardon me.
Can I just say something?
Hold on, Nick, don't do that.
Okay.
If Dr. Claudine Gay is still allowed to have her doctor's degree, and her plagiarism is absolutely horrific, I'm not so sure that I want to hear that Dr. King should be stripped of his if we're not going to be fair about it. That's all I wanted to say on that.
So I just want to make up. Can I say something though? Because you're bringing this up about Claudine Gay and plagiarism. I mean, It was the Boston University panel conclusively, 4 academics found that he plagiarized large portions of his dissertation. Now, with Claudine Gay, these accusations of plagiarism, when did they come out? Well, it came up after the 10/7 attacks in Israel, and she refused to condemn her students' right to freedom of speech. Now, I believe the attacks going on against Claudine Gay are actually motivated by people like Bill Ackman, a Jewish billionaire, and others who have a ethnic interest, I think, in removing these Ivy League academics from their positions.
Okay.
Now, that's my
Okay.
position. That's a
I hear
separate
you.
argument. That's a separate
That's
argument.
right. That's
So
why I
that's
need
what I
to
wanted
put
to
on the
say.
break.
So that's that.
Nick, I need to put on the brakes. Please calm your passions so that we can get this information out to the
that's
people.
fine. Well, I just wanted to counter your point.
I don't have a point. I'm actually pointing out things so that the audience can learn from all of you.
Okay.
Ken,
Yes,
could I interject something right here?
of course, because we have to get ready for part 2.
Okay, in regards to what's going on in the DEI movement today and what's going on with some of the civil rights organizations, so-called civil rights organizations today, such as BLM and other ones, people such as Patrice Cullors, you got your Abram Kendrys, you got the other ones. And back in the day, even those who were against Martin Luther King and what he was preaching, they had to discredit him, or they wanted to discredit him, so that their movement could grow larger and larger. So quite naturally, this was the case. And they're continuing to blow that out of proportion. And they blow it so far out of proportion today that they want to change history. They want to change the birth of this nation from 1776 to 1619 and so forth. And so we're bringing up a lot of good points here today, but we got to realize that there was an agenda behind trying to smear Martin Luther King's name. Yeah, he might have been a little dull in the senses and got off on the wrong track in the beginning, but he held to his beliefs. Even when the FBI called him in and different other ones called him in, President Lyndon Johnson, so forth, and told him to tone down, and they tried to bargain with him, he held to his views that I have a dream, and he wanted to see the civil rights movement progress, but he wanted to do it non-violently. Of course, those people back in those days, the Huey P. Newtons and the Stokely Carmichaels and so forth, they wanted violence. He wanted non-violence because he thought that that was the way to sit down at the table and to get your voice heard and to have things done in a more peaceful manner so that we could progress.
Exactly. And so as we wrap up part 1, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you're on the edge of your chair right now because Nick has a lot to say. He's over there boiling over. Nick, you got to hold it together, brother, because if you just pop like popcorn, it's just going to fly out the skillet. You ever have popcorn fly out the skillet and nobody gets to eat it? You know what I'm saying? Let's keep it. Steve knows what I'm talking about. Let's keep it going in this direction. This has been very interesting. And again, I could have prepared myself even deeper for this show. I decided not to because I wanted my understanding, my upbringing of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to be the tempo of what I'm hearing. Again, remember, yours truly was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. We were inundated with the message, So I want to stay virgin to this and allow you all to espouse your ideas. I couldn't have asked for a better panel than the one I have here with me now. As we close out on part 1, ladies and gentlemen, you want to be here on Tuesday night, 9 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. so you can get part 2 of this, because this is where it really gets sticky yicky. This is where we're going to just go ahead and, I guess, take off the gloves, just keep it civil. And let's have a conversation about it. But as we wrap up part 1, I'm going to defer to Jessica. Where are you at right now with Dr. King? Is he someone that we need to see removed from his haughty position, as Charlie Kirk said? Charlie Kirk said he was deified. That's a hard term to hear or read as a Black person. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the few people we can cling to and say this was good. When I read what my friend, and I do call him a friend, Charlie Kirk, when I read what he wrote, I don't read it with my mind. I read it with what I believe it's going to come across to as the Black community. So, Jessica, what are your thoughts right now as we wrap up part 1?
I want to go back to something that Emery said, and I really appreciated that from him, in that maybe he started out in the wrong place, and I believe that in some ways he really did that. He started with this socialism and with communism, and he dabbled in a lot of different things and in a lot of different ideas. And then in the midst of all that, he tried to bring it all back into his Christian view, and not all of it fit, not all of it worked. But I think what's really important here, that we are not going to tear this man down and rewrite our history. I have a real problem with that aspect of it. I think we need to see things realistically for what they are. And I think that what we teach our children and how we even educate ourselves on things, we need to be realistic about what we're really looking.
But you're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, is what
I'm not going to do that. I don't think that's fair. And as an educator, and as in being in that place where I had to teach children about this man, I think I had to be careful of what I was going to say and how I said it. But I think that what is it that we really want them to know about this person?
Exactly. Now I'm going to defer to my brother, Stephen, AKA MAGA Hulk. Tear it up.
Well, here's where I would beg to differ, because we have to look at the intent as well as the end result of what it is that
That's
people like Martin Luther King are trying to put forth, So when you look at what he's putting forth this grievance style, petition the government, go to the government, ask the government, beg the government, demand the government. We're not supposed to be going to government. First and foremost, as a Christian, if Martin Luther King truly was a Christian, which he wasn't, we would be going to God first and foremost. But also, when we look at what he instituted the Black community to look towards government for our end all be all. And you look at the Black community today, this is why I say there's a direct line from Martin Luther King and what he instituted then to what's going on right now within the Black community. All we do is beseech big government. All we want is political power, instead of doing what Booker T. Washington talked about and being politically, not worrying about the political aspect, but being financially independent, trying to grow our own wealth within our own communities. And in doing so, people of other races are going to see the importance of what it is that we're doing and want to naturally be a part of our ability to thrive, to survive and thrive. So I think that Martin Luther King was a detriment to the Black community and to the success of the Black community by instituting grievance among all else.
So I'm seeing one vote that says the memory and the legacy of Dr. King stays. If I got you right, Stephen, you're saying that the memory and the legacy of Dr. King needs to be re-examined and dialed down or dialed back.
Yes,
okay. Agnes?
Absolutely.
I don't have that much knowledge about Martin Luther King, but what I have seen, I see it with different eyes. I didn't grow up in this country, as you can imagine, as you can tell. I thought that he wanted the segregation to stop. He wanted the people to stop, wanted labor rights and the rights to vote. I don't know how he started, and I'm listening to both sides. Yeah, maybe he started in the wrong way and started with socialism ideas or Marxist ideas, and then reassess the whole thing. But personally, for me, I would like nothing more in this country than stop racism, stop separating people by race. We're all equal. We all bleed the same. I don't judge somebody on the case that they are Black or they are Latino or Asian or blue, black. I don't care. I judge people on the basis of their character. I have very good friends. My best friend was Black, and I never referred to him as Black.
I'm one of your friends, and I'm Black.
That's exactly right, Ken. That's exactly right. And I never referred to you as Black. I never separated that because I just don't. But I'll tell you one thing that's really sad. When I first immigrated to the United States, this is where I first saw what racism is. I was viewed as a Mexican, mind you, a stupid Mexican, because I couldn't speak English when we arrived in the United States.
Now you're saying that's how people viewed you. That's not what you are calling. That's what someone said about you.
That's how they viewed me. That's
Okay.
how they viewed me.
Just want to keep that clear.
And yeah, and that's very offensive because I grew up in Brazil with the Latin culture. I love Latin culture very much. I never denied that I'm Hungarian. I was born there. But I'll tell you, this racism, this division needs to stop. If everybody needs to be treated for their own character and integrity, who they are, their abilities, not because your great 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 grandmother was a slave. Unfortunately, which we should have never had that, but it is
Yeah.
what it is. We are to embrace history and learn from history.
Okay. Now,
Hey,
now,
hey, hey,
you know,
Ken.
you did your part, Agnes, and you say that the racism in America is painful to you. It's painful to all of us. I would agree. That you were viewed as a person of Hispanic, ancestry, and even that brought you racism. I mean, how do you win on that? When racism and bigotry is what it is. But my brother down here, Nick, I've known him for a while. I interviewed him for his campaign, full disclosure. And if I'm getting you wrong, Nick, stop me. But before you say your piece, I wanna frame it. When it comes to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC movement, the progressive movement, if that's the term I want to use, if it was intended like a butterfly effect, the butterfly wings ripple and then it causes a tidal wave on the other side, perhaps Dr. King's actions were unintended. Perhaps he meant something else to happen, but he was used. His message was morphed, perhaps. And what I'm getting is, and stop me if I'm wrong, Nick, that this entire idea of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. vis-a-vis Black Lives Matters and everything else that has come from this in the last 30 years or so has been an absolute detriment to the white community. Is that the position you're taking?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Martin Luther King was an anti-white leftist, anti-white Marxist. And I think if you look at other people in the Black community who've kind of commented on how things were in the country prior to the civil rights movement, people like Thomas Sowell, he mentions that there was a high level of families being intact, a high level of employment and other things like that. And granted, again, our history isn't perfect, but I think what's happened since the civil rights movement and the legacy of Dr. King, when you see what happens in Black communities all over the country, cities like Chicago and other places have become awfully worse. And I think he played a role in that. And also, I think there's an untold story that hasn't really been told, but other people have done yeoman's work on it. People like E. Michael Jones, who's a Catholic scholar and historian, and talks about essentially what amounted to an ethnic cleansing of America's Irish, Italian, Polish, and other ethnic communities from cities like Chicago, Detroit, and other places in the aftermath of the race riots in the 60s and Martin Luther King's presence in those areas. And, it's sad, and people talk about what happened to the old neighborhood, but it's something that is discussed quite often.
Right there.
Can I
you saying that he is?
Can you let other people finish? Can I finish, please?
Understood. Okay, yeah, your words are just very pejorative, Nick.
Yeah, I know, I understand. I just want to finish. I mean, I just want to say what I want to say. So I think so, and I think the baby should be thrown out with the bathwater. I think there are other Black Americans that African American or Black Americans. I don't like the term African American. I agree. I think they're Black Americans. They're a part of the country. And I think Black Americans have other people they could look up to, people like Billy Lee, for example. And you've never heard of his name. He was actually George Washington's personal assistant. I mean, he was his slave, but he actually rode with him throughout the American Revolution, helped him through every step of the way, was there at Valley Forge through a lot of other parts. And then you also have, and people might laugh at this, but I think Michael Jordan is actually a far more impressive and a far more unifying figure than MLK was. And I say that because when Michael Jordan had the chance, he said Republicans buy sneakers too. He didn't want to cause division. He's tried to be a apolitical figure and be someone that stands above the fold. So I think there are other figures people can look to. And when I look at Martin Luther King, I look at him as someone like Barack Obama or any one of these other Black grievance activists, quite frankly. And I think the baby should be thrown out with the bathwater. And, I think if we're going to be honest about our historical figures, we have to talk about his plagiarism. We have to talk about his philandering. We have to talk about all these things.
Can I say something else?
Yeah, well, we got to get ready for part two. I got you in a second. Yep. But Nick, you say that he's responsible for basically like the purging of whites from the inner city. But what about the ideation of white flight? I mean, everything seems to be geared towards a negative about Dr. King. But as Jessica pointed out, as an educator, some of these things that have happened were just part of the maelstrom of the energy that was Dr. King. But as far as saying that he intentionally purged whites from the inner cities, there was an idea of white flight because of the idea of integration. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, if you even look at integration, I mean, what was that? That was, you could argue, that was big government. That was socialism, the social engineering, where they were busing people from faraway communities to other communities. It totally kind of absconded our tradition of local rule and parochial rule in this country. So I would say that. And I think also when you look at some of these communities that have been affected, if you look at these cities like Detroit, like Chicago, why did the whites flee? Why was there white flight? Because there were these awful race riots. I mean, these race riots that occurred in the 60s, they were, honestly, quite frankly, what happened in the 2020 was worse. We know because we have economic data and other things to back it. But what happened in the 60s, our country was totally on fire. And Martin Luther King helped stoke the flames.
Okay. Well, with that, I want to go ahead and defer to Emory. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said when we started this chat about the Dreamer, this is going to be pretty interesting. And this is only part one. Emory, I'm going to let you usher us out to commercial, and then we'll come back next week with part two.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. You got to realize that a lot of what Dr. Martin Luther King wanted to realize and what he wanted to see come to America, as far as his views were based on equality. He wanted equality. He wanted the civil rights movement to make things better for all people. He wanted our children to be looked at by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. But he had those that were with him who were jealous of him. And I'll go ahead and mention their names. You had the Sharptons and the Jacksons and so forth. Mm-hmm. They looked at the civil rights movement as an opportunity to make money, mm-hmm. to continue to let the good times roll, because without it, they would not have any power. So they are the ones that are out here, and some of the other people in the modern civil rights movement who want equity rather than equality. They are basically trying to see to it that Dr. Martin Luther King's dream is destroyed, because it stops them from making a profit, and it also stops them from keeping the country united.
There it is. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard so far, and I am so honored with the panel that I have here tonight in this show that's titled A Chat About the Dreamer. We're going to go to commercial break. Well, actually, we're going to conclude part one, and we'll be back on next Tuesday, 9 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. You don't want to miss it. But I'll go ahead and close the show with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said that we have great scientists, but we don't have our souls. We have guided missiles controlled by misguided men. This is a quote from Dr. King. I want to thank you all for being here on this part. I trust that you'll be back for part two. Do I get that commitment?
Amen.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Outstanding. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your boy, Ken White, host of the Southside Unicorn Show. Listen to me. There's no place I'd rather be. There's nothing more I'd rather do than being right here doing this show for you. We're out.
Yeah.